Objection.
Mr. President, wildfires pose a significant threat to the safety and well-being of our citizens, particularly those living near federal lands. One way to protect against wildfires is with the use of fuel breaks. Now, fuel breaks are, think of them as firewalls for our communities. They're man-made areas with a reduced fuel load that are set up to act as a barrier to stop the slow the spread of wildfire. They slow it down. They make it so that the fire can't spread as quickly. In 2021, Congress created a series of categorical exclusions, specifically for the creation of fuel breaks. That was good. They were intended to protect communities adjacent to federal land from the devastating effects of wildfires. However, the federal agencies responsible for implementing these exclusions have been bogged down by regulatory delays. These delays are really problematic, and they're adding up, especially in certain parts of the country where there's a lot of federal land and where there's a lot of federal land near where people live. For example, in California, there are 5.1 million homes in the wildland-urban interface. The Forest Service and the BLM will never have the capacity to protect these homes. The hands of the states shouldn't be tied while they watch their homes being burned. And so Congress created a good thing. It did a good thing by creating these categorical exclusions. But it's been more or less rendered, I think by mistake, a dead letter in many areas because of these regulatory problems. So rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, we need to make this one work. My amendment aims to do precisely that. It aims to create a process for states to assume responsibility for the environmental analysis, approval, and execution of these projects. By allowing states to take on these responsibilities, we can expedite these critical projects for community protection. The safety and well-being of our citizens and our communities are at stake. By passing my amendment, we can take a significant step toward protecting our homes, communities, and critical infrastructure from the devastating effects of wildfires. And so, Mr. President, I call up my amendment number 80 and ask that it be reported by number.
The clerk will report by number.
The senator from Utah, Mr. Lee, proposes an amendment numbered 80.
Should I note the absence of a quorum? Oh, gotcha.
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware.
I don't rise every day to oppose amendments offered by Senator Lee. I'm afraid I'm going to have to oppose this one. For a couple of reasons. One, as a chairman of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, as a recovering governor who's helped run a state and was actually the chair of the National Governors Association for a while. I believe this amendment undercuts the National Environmental Policy Act and the federal government's important role in managing our federal lands. And while I appreciate the need for federal agencies and states to work together to minimize wildfire risk on our public lands, this amendment, I'm sorry to say, misses the mark. Specifically, this amendment would require, and I underline the word require, this amendment would require the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management to allow states to take over federal responsibilities for environmental reviews of many activities on public lands. This would be a significant change in management of our public lands, which belong, as we know, to all Americans. Although Senator Lee's proposal is modeled on a program at the Department of Transportation that allows states to assume some responsibilities for highway projects, this amendment is far broader in scope and impacts and lacks the numerous safeguards that are in place for the highway program. For instance, this amendment establishes mandatory and I emphasize mandatory, non-discretionary assignment of responsibilities to states. It has no requirement, as best I can tell, for public notice and comment, and does not require the federal agency to verify that the state has the resources and the personnel available to carry out federal responsibilities. It also includes, as best I can tell, no auditing or monitoring requirements. I am working with my colleagues, I believe on both sides of the aisle, on opportunities to improve environmental review procedures. But I must say this is not the right vehicle or way to proceed on this provision. And I'm reluctantly going to have to urge my colleagues, our colleagues, to vote no on this particular amendment. I yield.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I appreciate the insight and the observations of my friend and distinguished colleague, the senator from Delaware. And I appreciate the amount of effort that he puts into this. He has shown a lot of hard work. He makes raises some good points, and there are points that I might find persuasive if they were accurate. He seems to be under the impression that these would be broad categorical exclusions, that these procedures that we contemplate would apply broadly to all Forest Service operations. They wouldn't. This is talking only about fuel breaks, and only about fuel breaks in narrow sets of circumstances. He suggested incorrectly that there's no requirement in place to make sure that the states have the resources financially, regulatorily, and otherwise to undertake the analysis contemplated under this. It does. He's been misinformed on that point. Finally, Mr. President, I might feel differently about this if, like my friend from Delaware, if I were from a different state, if I were from the state of Delaware. But when you look at the western United States, we have federal land everywhere. You know, in every state to the east of Colorado's eastern border, the federal government owns less than 15% of the land in each state. In most states, it's in the single digits. In many states, it's in the low single digits. I don't remember what the percentage of land is in Delaware. I can find that out. In Utah, it's 2/3 of our land. It's 67%. In every state to the west of Colorado's eastern rim, it's more than 15%, and usually a lot more than that. That affects people. These are people's homes, their livelihoods, their communities, their economies are all put in jeopardy by the fact that the federal government owns too much land. It owns so much land that no one would have the capacity to operate this. No one. It's impossible. More than 5 million homes in California alone that are in these affected areas. No matter how efficient we made the Forest Service, no matter how many employees we authorize them to hire, you're still not going to be able to keep up with it. It's a matter of doing this or losing more property, losing more ecosystems, losing more homes and communities and sources of economic activity. That is what is at stake. Now, if the points he made were factually correct or legally correct, he might be right, but they're not correct. We need this, and we need to pass this now. Mr. President, thank you.
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President. I don't think I've got this wrong. Could be mistaken, but I don't think so. I would just say again, Senator Lee's proposal appears to be modeled on a program at the Department of Transportation that allows states, and I underline allows states, to assume some responsibilities, not all, but some responsibilities for highway projects. This amendment, having said it, this amendment is far broader in scope and impact and lacks the numerous safeguards that are in place for the highway program. For example, this amendment establishes mandatory, not discretionary assignment of responsibilities to states. And in doing that, it has no requirement for public notice and does not require the federal agency to verify that the state has either the resources or the personnel available to carry out federal responsibilities. Moreover, as best I can tell, this mandate includes no auditing or monitoring requirements. That should give all of us pause. That should give all of us pause and cause for concern. Having said that, I'm working with our colleagues on opportunities to improve environmental review procedures, but I just don't believe this is the right vehicle or the way to proceed on this particular provision. I look forward to discussing it further with our colleague from Utah in the days ahead. But for now, I'm going to urge our colleagues to vote no on this amendment.
Mr. President,
Senator from
I
Utah.
want to point to two things. First, on page 4 of the amendment, subdivision D, verification of resources. This requires each state participating in this to go through a process to verify that they've got the resources to do it. Let's turn to page 6. These are subject to full judicial review in the same way that they'd be subject to judicial review if these actions were being undertaken by a federal agency. So the only difference is these states and local governments, they have both the personnel and they have the incentive to do it. Federal land managers can't and don't and won't ever be able to do this the same way state people, state officials, state governments and local governments will be able to. We either care about these communities or we don't. If we don't adopt this, we are effectively nullifying what Congress passed back in 2021. We need to not do that. Mr. President, I know of no further debate on this matter.
Is there further debate?
Yeah, Mr. President, if I could.
Senator from Delaware.
Yeah, I'm looking at the language of the amendment, and on page 4, under subparagraph D, which is entitled verification of resources. And it reads, I'll just read part of it. It says, as a condition on entering into an agreement under paragraph 1, the secretary concerned may require a state, may require an Indian tribe to verify that the state or Indian tribe has the financial and personnel resources necessary to carry out the responsibilities described in that paragraph. It doesn't say should, it doesn't say must require, it says may require a state or Indian tribe to verify that the state or Indian tribe has the financial and personnel resources necessary to carry out the responsibilities described in that paragraph. I again have significant concerns here. I appreciate the intent of the author of the amendment, but I would just reiterate again the concerns that the more I look at this, the more concerned I'm. Rather than being less concerned, the more concerned I have become. With that, I yield back my time.
Mr. President?
Senator from Utah.
The distinction he's drawing on from the subdivision D on page 4
and come and sit right here.
It's the may-shall distinction. Now, the only way he can be right on this point is if he presupposes that the Secretary is just not going to care, that the Secretary is not going to exercise that authority. It's not going to happen. I'm sure he's not imputing lack of concern on the part of the Secretary of Agriculture to do that. He wouldn't do that. Secondly, look, if that's what's holding us up, if you want to switch, if you'd be willing to support it, if I made the may and turned it to a shall, I'll do that right now. I'll offer up a second-degree amendment or my own amendment right now, and we'll do that. If the gentleman from Delaware were to agree to that, I'd be fine with it. We could get this passed.
I'm not prepared to know whether or not there are other safeguards that need to be considered. I appreciate the good intent that the senator from Utah is showing, but standing here on the fly, I'm just reluctant to say if you change this once placed in this one word in this proposal, then I'm okay with all of it. So I would need a little bit of time to drill down and decide. It's hard to do it on the fly.
Mr. President?
Senator from Delaware, or pardon me, Senator from Utah.
This is how Western lands suffer. People from the eastern United States with neither the knowledge nor the concern about how they're managed don't care. And so while they passed something in 2021 to make these fire breaks easier put in place, it's a practical reality. Regulatory hurdles have proven too much. This would fix that. It's reasonable. There's nothing that the senator from Delaware has pointed to that makes this bill this amendment to this bill objectionable in any way. I urge my colleagues to support it. And as you do so, if you come from west of Colorado, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you come from the eastern United States, I beg you to imagine for a moment that you represented a western state where we've experienced, in some cases, decades of drought, and where we're sitting ducks amidst we're islands of private land amidst a vast, overwhelming sea of federal land that's chronically mismanaged because it's physically impossible for them to manage it properly to avoid this kind of thing. I urge you to be sympathetic to this and to support this.
Senator from Delaware.
This will be the last I say with respect to this amendment. If this amendment is not adopted, I would just say to the senator from Utah, I welcome the opportunity, my staff, your staff, is to sit down and talk it through and to better understand our concerns and to better understand where you're coming from. So,
be happy.
Yeah, I would actually keep that in mind.
Thank you. Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
I appreciate the magnanimous offer from my colleague, and I'll take him up on that. I still hope that this passes. It should pass today, and I implore my colleagues to do that. Mr. President, I know of no further debate on this amendment.
Is there further debate? If not, the question is on the amendment.
I call for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Bloom.